I shared with Harley for 3 years as we were both on the executive of the Evangelical Ministers Fellowship, and Harley reminded me he was the first Lutheran to share that chair. It was a wonderful contribution to our time. But we worked for 3 years on what was a fairly simple project. It was to develop a church covenant among the churches of the city. And it was difficult. And we met with Pastor Keith Johnson of the Christian Center, Pastor Mel Braun, myself, and I laughed and I talked about this being Johnson, and Blackman. That's a Band-Aid group. So we've had a Band-Aid group that's met fairly consistently across denominational lines. But the thing I want to talk to you about here was that after that 3-year period of time, and I haven't really talked, we worked, and I felt like, we came up with a paper, and it was approved, and it was over. It was like, what a waste of time. We didn't get anywhere. Nothing was all this working. And later, as I look at it now, about 15 years later, I look and see that those seeds were planted, and they're young people, and they're places, and they're groups of pastors, and there's a group of business leaders who are doing things not just off on their own corner by themselves, but they're doing things together. If you know anything at all about the history of this city, you'll look downtown on 20th Street, and I remember being with Bishop Ken Weisgerber, and him saying, 20 years ago, he said, we'll see the power of God. This is a Roman Catholic Christian. We'll see the power of God when we see men and women, pastors and leaders feeding and caring for those on 20th Street. Today, that's a reality. There is more work coming from collective groups of God's people in the city on 20th Street than ever. And the power is going out of that to our city. The people there are bringing God's gift to the suburbs and to the rest of us. They're young people. One of them, particular example, is called the Saskatoon Worship Community. You may have heard of it, you may not have. It's a group of young people. I went there and we were way old, really old people in that situation. They were alive for 3 hours. They're worshiping God, and they're doing it all differently than anybody else that we did. But there's no question when you go there. What you know is that this isn't dead. This is alive. And then we see businessmen, and we see a various group, all kinds of groups that are not what we normally think of church, and people who are taking root and doing things in the city. One of the stories I like to tell, and I didn't have a chance to get John Gormley on the phone because it wasn't possible. He was talking about how terrible it was, last November, that we passed this casino referendum and voted down a casino within the city. And I want to say to John, you and these chambers, this was 2003, and Saskatchewan, along with PEI and Nova Scotia, are have-not provinces. We have everybody leaving and nobody coming. And those people at that time says, if you don't take this casino and put it in the city, then the Saskatoon is just going to dry up and blow away because our economic hopes are over. Now, 2 years later, just with one thing, another here and there, we find that the power of economic success, the immigration of people literally from all over the world to come, and certainly from all over Canada. And so in the course of that, I make the connection that when God's people come together and God's people make a stand, that there is power here, and it follows a blessing. I'm not going to say if you follow God, you're going to get rich. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that there is a blessing. And Saskatoon, you can say right now today, many in a number of places would say that this is one of the most important economic centers in North America today. I make that connection, and I do believe. One of the things I was talking with Harley about it in just a moment ago, that the relationship, the thing, a good Lutheran boy, he reminded me, I shouldn't say, he said he got kicked out of confirmation, but our mayor, Don Atchison, it's been a wonderful thing for me. I don't know what you think about Don. Maybe you're unhappy about a bridge. I don't know what you may be. That's okay. But I've seen this man grow in Christ. I've seen him sponsor and grow with the mayor's prayer breakfast. And I've seen things. Our city's not perfect. We've got problems. But nobody's perfect. But I am saying that this momentum has built because of the blessing of God. It's been an extremely important part of that. The last story I want to share with you is probably the one that is most compelling. Harley and I and every other pastor in the city had a good friend, Pastor Ken Rutherford. Ken Rutherford and his wife Lynna led the Native Alliance Church in the same building with the Chinese Alliance Church on Idlewild and 26th Street for 19 years. And after 19 years, it was always fun to hear Ken talk about his church. He says, well, we're not to 1,000 yet. Not really to 100 yet, and barely 40 yet. And some people would look at that and say, well, not much happened with that life. And yet, Ken became very ill. And cancer took over his body. And for a period of about 8 months, there was a wide group of people who gathered every Sunday afternoon at 5 o'clock down at the Native Alliance Church. Because Ken had the heart, Ken and Lynna both had the heart to say, my illness is not just my illness. I believe in this God speaking to him, that my illness is representative of this church, of the city. It's also got an illness. It's also needs to be healed. People prayed. Loving people prayed. Long, hard, and sought after God. And on October of 2011, Ken died with results of his cancer. And we're tempted to look and say, God, you can't answer the prayers of these people, and he was such a good man. And what are we doing? Well, the story that I like to tell, and this is only my piece of the story, was that while this was going on, Lynna, Ken's wife, had met a Roman Catholic maiden lady, a beautiful lady, in Parables bookstore, and they were talking, and so she started coming in, and she decided she was going to video the various prayer sessions, and so I had an opportunity to visit with her, and of course it doesn't sit. And I was privileged to be a part of that night, during that process, not too long after Ken became ill, and there was a new Roman Catholic bishop who had been assigned to Saskatoon, and I was there for hardly 4-hour service. We don't have any 4-hour services in my church, and I'm glad, but anyway, for the ordination of the bishop. But I knew something in my heart that night that this city was going to be different. I knew just by what I saw and heard and felt. And so I said to Francine, we've got a new bishop. Why don't you invite him down to come and pray with us? The bishop came and he prayed. It never happened before. It was pretty much an evangelical, even more on Pentecostal charismatic group to some degree. But the bishop came and participated and spoke. And then he was in the Vatican with a meeting there on just prior to the day of Ken's funeral. He flew in that night. He drove from the airport to Circle Drive Alliance, where the funeral was actually taking place, and spent time there. Well, out of that connection, a whole bursting of things has happened. There was the first time, not too long after that, about 6 months, that we had the first ever Roman Catholic evangelical worship service in St. Paul's Cathedral. After that, Harley and I were invited to be a part of a Roman Catholic evangelical dialogue, which began in 2011. And we just recently had our first, in a non-Catholic church, we had a worship in November. And in about 4 weeks ago this Sunday, Bishop Don Boland had come to Circle Drive at our request that he would bring and be the preacher for the morning. The mayor came and said,
I'm just going to be a referee because this never